Good morning, and welcome to Mystical Teachings from the Tanya. Rabbi Ronnie Fine coming to you from Chabad Zichron Kedeshim in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. We say good morning, or good afternoon rather, to Anna in Budapest. Thank you for joining. And Joe, shalom. Linda and her sister Denise, good morning in New York. Rena in Colorado, Boker Tov. Beverly is with us and from Alabama, shalom. Stan from London, England. Greetings and good afternoon. John is with us in North Carolina. Thank you for joining. Dinette. Did I pronounce that right? I hope so. Shalom. Mika, shalom to you. And who else is there? Elaine. Welcome. Luciana and Alice from Baltimore. Okay, Lara is with us from Queens. Shalom. Abraham. Hello. Shalom. Raya from Virginia. Welcome. And Powix. I'm sure I got that pronounced improperly. Erev Tov to you in the Philippines. Balinit. Greetings from Hungary. Debrecen. All right. Wonderful. Stuart, good morning. Debrecen is where Elie Wiesel, I think, was from, if I remember correctly. Diane from London, Ontario. Good morning. Robert, shalom. Freeman from Plano. Welcome. Chuva. From, you have to remind me, I forgot now. Mary Claire, good morning. And Olga. All right, folks. We conclude today the first chapter in one word, neshamas, plural for soul, souls, as we will come to understand today. We've been asked several questions in the first class. Most importantly is, what is this concept of a Beinoni, of an intermediate person? Not righteous, but not a Rasha. Rasha we translate as wicked. We'll understand later on in chapter 11 a little more precisely what that means. Now, we can't say that a Beinoni is someone who has even any sin upon them. Because Rabbah, who is the head of his generation, called himself a Beinoni. So he called himself a Beinoni? Can't be because he had half merits and half demerits. Right? Can't be that. Can't even be that he neglected the study of Torah, because he didn't. So much so that the angel of death had difficulty to bring him away from this world and bring him upstairs, as we say, because he was studying, engaged in service of God nonstop. The Alter Rebbe today says there's a well-known saying that someone whose deeds and misdeeds are equally balanced, they're called a Beinoni. So that term is there in Maimonides, in the Talmud. So meaning someone whose majority of virtue outweighs their misdeeds, their sins, is called a righteous person. Someone whose majority of sins outweighs their virtues is called a wicked person. And a Beinoni is someone who's down the middle. So the Alter Rebbe says that's true, that term is used for the righteous Beinoni in Russia. However, that's a borrowed term. In other words, it's a figurative term of speech. It's not the true usage of the term to describe the individual. In other words, someone who's imbalanced between good and evil in them, the good deeds and misdeeds, right? That is only when we're speaking about reward and punishment. In other words, if you're standing before a court of law, for example, or standing before the high court in heaven, and you have more good than bad, so then the judgment will be favorable. The opposite will be the opposite. If it's in the middle, the scales are balanced equally, you're a Beinoni. But that's only when in terms of judgment of the individual. In other words, a person is judged according to the majority of their deeds. So if you are termed righteous, that's in reference to the verdict, since you've been acquitted in the trial, heavenly trial, the earthly trial, whatever the case is, right? But if we're talking about the true definition of these terms as they apply to the individual as a person, then tzaddikim and beinonim have a different definition. As we mentioned yesterday, we quoted from the Talmud, our sages explain that the righteous, they're judged or motivated, right, ruled by their good nature, their holy side. As it says, King David says in Psalms, in Tehillim, I have slain, my heart is slain within me. My negative feelings that are rooted in the left ventricle of the heart, metaphorically, has been slain, meaning King David fasted a lot. And through his fasting and his prayers, he had rid himself of the negative side. It took some doing, took some effort, took some time, but he got rid of that negative side, meaning the evil nature that we all have in our hearts, in our left ventricle of the heart, right? But a person who hasn't reached that degree of ridding themselves of their evil nature, right? And even though their virtues outnumber their sins, is not a righteous person, is not a tzaddik. As a matter of fact, that person's not even a Beinoni, as we'll see more about that. So what do we have here? A righteous person, at this point that we're discussing, is an individual whose evil nature, and we're going to get into more what that evil nature means, that evil nature is gone. It's not there. So this is why our sages say in the Talmud, the Almighty saw that the righteous were few, very few. To rid yourself of a nature that has any evil to it, any lust in the heart, for example. So there were very few righteous, therefore God arose, as it were, and planted, meaning spread them out in every generation. Because every generation there needs to be righteous. Why? Because Tzaddik Yesod Elam, the righteous, are the foundation of the world. So we need righteous people at all times. But what we see over here, righteous means getting rid of that negativity that's inside of our heart. And that's why our sages say there's so few of them. And they have to be made certain that every generation there needs to be righteous people. Now, so that's the explanation of of the righteous individual, and there's different gradations of that we will discuss. And of the Beinoni, likewise, we're talking about not someone who rid himself of his evil nature in his heart, but we will see later on more about that. More about that concept. So not like the righteous, but still someone who hasn't sinned. Now, based on what we've just learned, so what comes out from this is, as the Arizal explains, that we have, whether you're righteous or you're wicked or a Beinoni, what you have is two souls. As it says in Isaiah, Neshamas ani asisi, souls I have made, plural, not one. But it's speaking about plurality of souls, meaning there's two souls that a person has. One that originates in Klipa, in Sitra Acher. We're not going to get it. Tomorrow we'll do soul number 2. Now we're going to just briefly do soul number 1. And later in chapters 6 through 9, we will define this soul that is of Klipa and Sitra Acher, as of the shell that covers over it, and the Sitra Acher, the negative force. We will explain it again, chapters 6 to 9 at greater length. But right now, the Alter Rebbe is giving the basic concept of this soul, that it originates in Klipa, meaning that there's a shell covering over on the holiness and the godliness, the godly force that's within it. Why is that? Well, we'll learn more about that, but we're just stating the facts right now. It originates, it resides, figuratively speaking, clothes itself in the blood of the human being. The blood is what gives vitality to our physical reality. And that's where this soul resides. It has negative characteristics to it, being that it is something that gives vitality to our physical body. This soul has the qualities of the physical world in spiritual ways. What are the 4 basic dimensions of the physical world? Is earth, water, fire, and air. So what does that mean? So this soul has an element of fire, abstract fire, spiritual fire. What is the concept of fire? Fire is something that rises up. And therefore, what is that in this soul? That is the anger and the pride that a person feels. What does anger do? It makes you red as fire, right? What does pride do? Soars you aloft, and you feel bigger, better than others. Then there is water. Again, the spiritual element of water, because the physical water in this world, after all, does evolve from the spiritual element of water. So the spiritual element of water reflects itself in the physical. What does water do? Well, water gives pleasure, right? The greatest pleasure. You're thirsty, you drink some water, revives the soul. So that's the idea of pleasure, that it makes things grow that are pleasurable. So that is just seeking pleasure. Then we have air. What is air? You're full of hot air, they say, right? Meaning boasting, idle talk, frivolity, scoffing. Those are all elements of air. They lack substance. And then you have, of course, earth, which is weighing down the person. That's sloth. Not easy to move around because you're lazy, or melancholy. That's all the element of earth. Again, the abstract spiritual idea of this, right? So the soul stems from this place of klipa, but klipas noiga is what we're talking about here. We're talking about the Alter Rebbe is speaking here about the Jewish animal soul that is coming from klipas noiga. It's a shell, it's covering over, but that klipas noiga has negative quality to it, as we just mentioned, the 4 characteristics, but it also has some good in it. There's some good. So what is that good? What does that good translate into? It means doing good from the animal soul, doing things out of compassion, or being benevolent, because that's some of the good that's in klipas noiga. Now, what does that mean? How do we understand it? Well, we know the tree of knowledge of good and evil has a mixture of good and evil. So likewise, the klipa noiga, that is this soul, is animated from this element, and therefore there's good. So what does that mean? It means that the Jewish soul has an inherent quality to do good from klipas noiga. How do you translate that good? Well, the Alter Rebbe gives a contrast. He says the nations in the world, by and large, unless they are Chasidei Umas Elam, the righteous of the nations of the world, which today there'd be a lot more than maybe in the times of the Alter Rebbe, I would suggest. I think maybe the Rebbe has suggested that in other places. So that the souls of the nations of the world also come from a klipa, but a different form of klipa that is all about self-fulfillment. Why do good? Because it feels good. Why do good? Because it makes me look good. Why do good? Because there's a glorification in doing good. And this is the motivation. There's corporations that give money for charity. You know why? Because it makes them look good in the community. So they give money. But they give them money in order to look good. That is self-fulfillment, obviously in a negative way, and it isn't really good. And as our sages say, that the kindnesses of the nations is an act of self-glorification, act of self-fulfillment. So I do good because it fills self. So that's not really good. The act, may be a benefit to others. Absolutely, no question about that. But it's not coming from a good place. So what does goodness mean over here? It's not about me. Even on this level, this is not about the godly soul, this is about the animal soul. So if goodness was, let's say I wanted to do, someone needed my help and I was going to help out that person, but in the interim, someone else came and helped that individual. And I'm not needed anymore. So I'd be just as happy. You know why? Because it wasn't about me doing the good, it was about the good being done. But if it's about me doing the good because I feel good, or I'll get some kind of glorification by doing that good, then your motivation has got nothing to do with being good. Motivation has nothing to do about being good. That is the element. So, and I know this might be a little controversial, but the Alter Rebbe says this here, so I want to be true to the teachings. It says that's the nature of the Jewish soul. Now, of course, a Jew can corrupt it, and someone who isn't Jewish, a non-Jew, as we mentioned, those who are righteous here of the non-Jewish world doesn't mean righteous that you've slain your evil within you, but it means actually it doesn't. It's chasidi u'masolim. It's the pious. It's actually not righteous. The term isn't righteous. Interesting. So there, it's not the natural state of being. It's something that needs to be brought to. I would like to bring, and again, maybe everybody's not going to appreciate this, but I will share it because since the Alter Rebbe puts this in the first chapter, it's obviously an important thing to appreciate. So, I live here in Montreal. There's about 85,000 Jews, 3 million people. So the local Jewish Federation collects about $40 to $50 million a year from 85,000 Jews, for the most part from the Jews. I mean, I'm sure there's non-Jews that also give. 3 million people to the similar kind of institution, Sontrade as it's called over here, also collects $50 million. How does that make sense? Now you might say, oh, Jews have money. Oh, Jews give. It starts from something. It starts with the nature of the soul. The nature of the soul, of the animal soul. We're not talking about even the godly soul over here. Of the animal soul, the life-giving soul to the body, comes from the Klipas Noiga, and therefore that element will bring not because you've worked on yourself at any great measure, but you have that nature within you that will then bring you to compassion to be more giving. And this is not just, the occurrence here in Montreal, but throughout the entire world. And that giving isn't for sense of self-fulfillment. Now, there are definitely Jews who give, they want their names up in bright lights, and they're looking for the honor, and they're looking for the self-glorification. Absolutely. What the Alter Rebbe is speaking here is what is the normative nature of this soul within the Jew versus nations of the world. That's what he's speaking about. Is there an aberration of that? Absolutely. Is there from non-Jews that are, have that instinctual? This is an instinctual thing in a sense of doing good for goodness sake, for God's sake. Actually, for God's sake might be already even a higher element over here, but for goodness sake. Like, be good, to be good. Because that's what I'm needed. That's what, that's what is needed of me. Not so I can attach myself to God, and, that's already a higher level. We're not even talking about this higher level. We're talking about something that's coming from this vital animal soul, right? We're not talking about coming from the godly soul motivation, which, we'll speak a lot more about that in, we'll start with the godly soul tomorrow. But this is what the Alter Rebbe explains, the nature of this, generally speaking, versus the nations of the world. So, any questions? Any comments? I know that sometimes that can be a challenge for some people to wrap their minds around. I know many Jews are sometimes embarrassed with that. But the Alter Rebbe puts it in the first chapter of Tanya. So that must mean that there's something very important for us to understand and to appreciate and to accept. Give me a moment because I'm having trouble seeing the questions or the comments that have been written. Okay, Anna, thank you. Stan N, also thank you. Anybody have? Let me see if I can see another. All right. It looks clear. Thank you. Joe. Beautiful. Linda. Stuart. Stuart, you want to say the Shema Yisrael? Okay. Shema Yisrael. Adonai Eloheinu. Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Folks, oops. Did I turn this around? Okay. I don't know what I did here. Oh, there we go. Deborah. About giving, yes. All right, we'll deal more about this, God willing. Okay, but thank you for your comments. A reminder: tomorrow night is Hanukkah, the first night of Hanukkah. So make sure you have your menorah. Make sure you also have candles if you're using candles. I use oil, olive oil. Preferred way is olive oil. But if you don't have that, make sure your candles are big enough that they last half an hour in the dark. And a lot of the candles that are sold don't last long enough and are not kosher. Kosher in the sense that you don't fulfill the mitzvah because it has to stay in the dark after nightfall for half an hour lit at least. And obviously it can be more than that. All right, folks, we will continue. Looking forward. Please share the Alter Rebbe's teachings and private message me with your email so we can put you on and for other things that are happening. And also, if you can go to my YouTube station, Tanya Rabbi, and subscribe, that would be great. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zichron Kadeshim in Montreal, Canada, where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Have a wonderful day.